Okay, so this is the walkthrough for your required weekend homework. I know we don't do this very often, but in order to meet all of our curriculum demands, this is one weekend where you are going to have to walk yourself through a lesson with my guidance. So in our modules, you will see there's one called Graded Constitutional Principles. Now, once I have finished with this recording, you will see the recording here, and you will use that to guide you through the lesson guide called Constitutional Principles. So let me send this to the bottom real quick. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. When you open your lesson guide, it's going to look like this. And as I go through the lesson, you will fill in your lesson guide with the appropriate content based on this lecture burst. So, constitutional principles. What we're going to be talking about today is the fact that the US Constitution is a written document that explains the structure of our government and how power is given to people in the United States. So, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain how the Constitution balances that power between the three branches of government, as well as between the federal government and the state governments. So, we're going to do an activator, we're going to take some notes. You will watch a video, you'll examine the preamble of the Constitution, and then you will have a vocabulary activity at the end. So, first of all, on your lesson guide, examine the powers that each of these people have. Let's pay attention to these colors. So, within the US political system, we've got politicians, and these are the people who make our laws. We also have the police who enforce those laws, and we have judges that interpret what those laws mean and who they apply to. So, within our system, we have powers separated between different groups of people. So, how do we make sure that no one gets too much power in our government? This is a concept called separation of powers. And separation of powers is the division of basic government roles into those three branches of government that you all have been hearing about since elementary school. So, this key term, separation of powers, means how power is divided between those three branches of government. And this is a key vocabulary term that you're going to hear over and over again for the rest of your life, pretty much. So, in the American system, we've got the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And I've tried to color code everything here to help you remember, right? So, we have politician, we have them as blue, the police is yellow, the judges is green. And you'll notice here the legislative branch is blue, the executive branch is red, and the judicial branch is green. So, who is included in the legislative branch? And this is what we call Congress. So, we have the Senate, which has 50 senators, two from each state, and the House of Representatives, which, as we talked about on Monday, was the compromise where one house of the Congress is based on population, which is the House of Representatives, and the other House of Congress, everyone gets the same amount of representatives, regardless of population size, and that is the Senate. The executive branch includes people like the president's cabinet, the vice president, all of those people that are appointed to those high level government positions, such as, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, all the people that work very closely with the president to do the work of enforcing the laws in the country. Then we have the judicial branch, which includes the Supreme Court and the district courts, which there are 94 district courts in the United States. Districts do not correlate with states, obviously. They can spread over regions. They cut up large population areas. Sometimes you'll have two district courts in a region. Just, they kind of break it up into smaller parts. So, as you have probably guessed by now, the legislative branch, they make the laws. The executive branch enforces those laws, and the judicial branch interprets those laws. And those are the three basic functions of our government system. So, there are two videos here for you to watch. One has already decided to play itself. I'm going to pause it. So, I would like you to watch both of these. And if you notice on your lesson guide here, there's nothing for you to write, there's nothing for you to do. Okay, just watch the videos and kind of absorb the information. This one right here is a TED Talk, and it's aimed more at middle school students. This one down here is aimed at elementary school students, but does an excellent job of digging more into specifically what each branch of government does. So even though I know they're talking to you like your little kids, try to ignore the tone and just absorb the information. So go ahead and watch those. Pause this video, watch these embedded YouTube videos, and then restart my recording when you're done. All right. All right, so back to our notes. They both want to play. Okay, so now we're going to take some notes, and you'll notice on your note sheet that some of the boxes have been filled in for you. For the ones that are not filled in, add them in as I talk you through them. So this first column right here is the legislative branch, okay? And as we've talked about, they are the ones who make the laws. So they write the bills, the laws, okay? The executive branch has the power to veto those laws or to pass them. So Congress creates the laws, they send them to the president to either veto them or to pass them to sign them into law. Okay. The next stage is if there are legal challenges, if there's questions about whether or not this bill that was written by Congress, passed by the president, is that bill constitutional or that law constitutional? This typically takes some time. It's rare that you go straight from having a bill be passed to immediately ending up in the courts. Um, so sometimes a law can be on the books for a couple of years before any kind of ruling on its constitutionality has been made. Um, and we will get more into how the judiciary actually works when we take a look at some really important court cases here in a couple of weeks. But just know that there can be quite a few years of a gap between a bill being passed and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, having to decide whether or not it's constitutional. Now, the executive branch also has the power to appoint federal judges. So these are the district court judges. These are the ones that rule on cases of federal crimes, not state crimes. And the president has the power to appoint all of those federal judges. However, just because a president appoints a judge doesn't automatically mean that they will take the bench. Congress has to confirm federal judges. So they interview all these judges, they come to hearings, and they decide whether or not this person should be sitting on the bench of a federal court. So again, it's like the president nominates the person, and then the Congress decides whether or not that person can actually take the job. Now, because of this, even though the president is the one appointing these judges, judges are not controlled by the president or anyone else in the executive branch. Judges, regardless of who appointed them, an appointment for life. So once you've been appointed as a federal judge, you don't have to necessarily strictly do everything that the president wants you to do. You are supposed to make judgment based on the law and based on the evidence, not based on political parties. Now, the legislature, Congress, can also impeach and remove federal officials from office. This includes the president, any of his advisors, um, judges who maybe broke the law somehow. So Congress has the power to remove people from the executive branch or from the judicial branch from their office. They hold hearings. And they make a determination on whether or not this person should be impeached. Presidents can also grant pardons for federal crimes. Typically, presidents will do this when there is evidence to say that this person has either served enough time or new evidence comes to light, or in some cases, they're friends with the person. And presidents typically wait to do this until they are leaving office to grant these pardons. And finally, the judicial branch also has the power to declare actions taken by the executive branch as unconstitutional. So there have been cases in the past where presidents have issued um, presidential orders that have then been challenged in the courts, and those actions, those orders have been declared unconstitutional, and so they have been struck down and not allowed to be in effect anymore. So the executive branch can also exercise, or the judicial branch can also exercise power over the executive branch in that way. All right. Now, the three branches of government provide for a system of checks and balances. So, as we just saw in our last slide, okay, each of these branches has some degree of control over another branch, right? So, the executive has some control over what bills are actually passed, while the judicial can say this law that was passed by the executive can't be a law anymore. Um, you know, the executive branch can appoint judges, but Congress can decide whether or not those judges actually end up being seated. So you can see that there are checks and balances to make sure that no one branch of the government has more power than the other. Now, in practice, this is not always true. There are cases over the years where sometimes Congress is extremely powerful and the executive branch is weaker. And then in other time periods, we've seen a very strong executive branch with kind of a weaker Congress. And in the past 50, 60 years or so, we have seen the judicial branch get a lot stronger than it was in previous decades. So the ability of each branch to exercise controls over the other branches is this idea of checks and balances to try to keep the power equal and fair across the three branches of government. All right. So here are just some quick facts about the Constitution on your capture sheet. You just have to fill in some dates just to kind of orient you of where we are at in time right now. So the Constitution was finished and signed by the delegates at the convention on September 17th, 1787. Okay, so this is just when it was finished and signed at the convention. It became law officially June 21st, 1788, so almost a year later, when 9 states ratified it. So when 9 of the 13 states ratified it, it officially became the law of the land. The Constitution itself is divided into 7 articles or parts, and the introduction of the Constitution is what we call the preamble. So it's kind of like, hi, this is what this document's about, and then it actually goes into the different articles of the Constitution. So here is the text of the preamble of the United States Constitution. So I will give you a second to read through this. So, as you can see from this preamble, that the whole idea behind the Constitution is that the people rule. It starts off with we the people. So, the delegates who wrote this Constitution really did view themselves as representatives of the American people. And they just happened to be the ones writing this down. We the people, okay, of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, which means peace, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, there's a lot to unpack just in this preamble, right? They state a lot of ideals, a lot of principles in this first paragraph. They're talking about justice, they're talking about peace, defense, the common good, which is general welfare, as well as the ideas of liberty. So there is a lot in just this one longish sentence that presents the principles that our whole Constitution was based upon, these ideas of justice and liberty and peace. There is a video embedded in here from Schoolhouse Rock. Feel free to watch it before moving on with the rest of this lesson. So the idea behind this, the people rule, this idea is called popular sovereignty. Okay. This word you are going to hear forever and ever and ever. Popular sovereignty. Okay. The rule of the people. So just as a quick example to help you make the connection here between the US government and something that's more um, real to your daily life is power in the government is similar to the way power is distributed within a school. So each classroom is like a state, right? And each classroom has its own power where the teacher is like the governor. So you have students who are citizens and you have a governor who's kind of in charge of that particular classroom state. But then the school itself is like the federal government in Washington, D.C., where the principal is like the president. So you, the people in the classroom, we together, we kind of set the standards for the classroom, we define the expectations, and then as your teacher, I kind of ensure that those agreements are being met on a daily basis. However, I have a boss too who's telling me certain things that I need to be doing in my classroom. And I have to do what my principal says because she has more power than I do as the federal, quote unquote, federal government. So you're going to be seeing three words a lot used interchangeably. These words are federal, national, and central. All of these terms refer to the same idea of a national government. So federal, national, central, no matter what word is being used, it all is referring to the government that is located in Washington, D.C. Okay, so just keep that in mind that all these three words refer to the same thing. They refer to the government in Washington, D.C. Now, to get into some specifics about the structure of the Constitution itself, and we're going to get into some other things with this later in the week, but the big question was who would get more power in the US, the federal government or the states? And that was the big issue with the Articles of Confederation, remember? Shays' Rebellion proved that the national government was not strong enough to protect the people. They didn't have the resources they needed in order to have a standing army to enforce the laws and to ensure the safety of the public. And so that's why this Constitution even happened in the first place. So, this question of who should be more powerful, the federal government or the state governments? And in this constitutional convention, there were two groups or factions that were arguing this out. So there were the Anti Federalists, and this group was led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And then there were the Federalists, who were led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. So the differences between these two groups is the anti-federalists, okay, anti-federal government, believed that the state governments should be strong, and they should be stronger than the federal government. That's why they're called anti-federalists. Okay, so the anti-federalists believe that state governments should be more powerful than the national federal government. On the other side, you have the Federalists who, because they were called Federalists, we know, believed in a strong national government. They felt that the central government should be stronger than the state governments. The anti-federalists, their big concern with wanting to have strong state governments was they felt that the national government could not protect the individual rights of people in the states. And that was their biggest fear, was that by having a strong national government, that people's individual rights would get trampled on, just like they had when they were colonies of Britain. So that was kind of their case, was why would we want a strong national government when we've seen that strong national governments tend to ignore the rights of individual citizens? So that was their whole stance on this issue. The Federalists believed that the state governments should be in charge of protecting rights. Okay, so they would say, look, we're just the national government. We can have a military, we can set taxes, we can do all of these things. States, you worry about individual rights. And that was kind of their whole thing, was that it is not the federal government's place to protect the rights of individuals. So, in order to overcome this extremely critical question of individual rights versus state governments versus federal governments, the anti-federalists agreed that they would ratify the Constitution when the Federalists agreed that there would be a Bill of Rights included in the Constitution. And that's what we're going to explore later this week, is we're going to get into the Bill of Rights. This compromise is what allowed the Constitution to be approved and signed by the delegates at the convention. Now, the concept of the division of power between national and state governments is called federalism. Now, the United States is not the only country that has a federalist system that separates power or distributes power between a central government and a state or regional or or county government. So federalism is the term we use when we're talking about power being split up between the national government and smaller units of government, whether that's a state or a province or whatever it is they happen to call their smaller units in the country. So just to kind of give you a visual of how the separation of powers and federalism work, okay? So up here on this part of the kind of graphy thing shows the separation of power, okay? The government rolls into three branches. And then over here, we show how federalism divides power between national and state governments. So as you can see, at the national level, we have Congress doing the legislative branch, the president in the executive, and the Supreme Court in the judicial. But then at the state level, states have their own legislatures. They have a governor that acts as the executive, and they have state courts to prosecute state crimes. And then we break it down even further into the local level, where you have a county council that makes laws for the county. You have a county executive or mayor who makes enforces the laws passed by the council. And then you have county courts that prosecute county level crimes. So as you can see, not only are the powers separated across the three branches of government, but all of those branches appear at all levels of government as well. So now at the bottom of your lesson guide, there is a graded check for understanding. And what you're going to do is take this practice quiz. The purpose of the quiz is to help you study and learn the important concepts and terms that we covered in this lesson. These terms are going to come back over and over and over and over again. And it's really important that you understand these terms as well as the concepts that came out of the Constitutional Convention. So, this quiz, you can take it multiple times until you get 100%. It's a Google form. Um, and so, the purpose of this, it's a formative quiz. Okay, let me show you here. Okay, and a formative quiz is for learning. Okay, so it's a learning quiz, not a cumulative, which is a summative quiz that you can't retake. Okay, so you're going to take this quiz. You can take it multiple times until you get 100%, but please take advantage of being able to take it multiple times to ensure that you really understand all of these things. It's a completion grade. And so I will be putting in the completion grade for this quiz. Your lesson guide does not need to be turned in. Okay, this is for you to take notes and to learn with to help you do your best on this quiz here. So the graded portion of this assignment is this practice quiz. So if you have questions, please come to FSI after school on Monday. But this whole lesson, including the quiz, is due by Wednesday because you need to have learned all of these things prior to our lesson on Thursday the 10th. Okay, so this is due by Wednesday the 9th. All right, so that is it for now. If you have questions, you can also email me over the weekend. And that's it. See you guys later.